Hey, how's it going? This is Dave Polinsky. I'm the vocalist for Volcandra, and I'll be answering some questions for you guys today. Volcandra is a melodic black and death metal band from Louisville, Kentucky. The band was formed in 2018 and was founded by River Jordan, Mike Hargrave, Dyer Keithley, Jamie DeMar, and myself. The name Volcandra is essentially a made-up word, but was lifted from a song title from a band that some of our members were in prior to this band's formation. But we do like to think of it meaning scorched earth or scorched moon. The Way of Ancients is Volcandra's second full-length record and our first full-length release with Prosthetic Records. It tells an overarching high fantasy story from start to finish and combines elements of melodic death metal, black metal, and thrash metal, all in one cohesive work. Throughout the record, there is a balance between aggression and atmosphere to kind of represent forces of good and evil clashing together. The lyrics and the story that The Way of Ancients tells are based off of a video game series from the late 90s to the early 2000s. I don't want to give away exactly what video game series this is, but if you are familiar with the source material, it won't be hard to figure out at all. And if you do a little digging into the lyrics or maybe into some of the names of the songs, it'll be very easy to figure out. But like I mentioned earlier, the record is a high fantasy concept. So essentially the story is about a world that is thrown into disarray by powerful forces of evil. And there is a group of unlikely heroes that has to come together, and they must go across multiple types of terrain, through the deserts and the forests and the caves and the jungles and all the way to a mountain peak in order to take down these forces of evil and restore balance to the world that which they live in. So the album art for The Way of Ancients was done by Verity Zotok, very talented artist, great guy, love working with him. And what you see on the front cover of the album is that mountain peak I spoke of earlier in the previous question. And at this peak, the warriors have to go through a trial before they can descend into the final dungeon to take down the last remaining force of evil. And at this trial on this mountain peak, they must face off with these ancient warriors to prove their worth before they can even, go forth with this quest. So that's where not only the inspiration for the visual with the album comes from, but also the title, The Way of Ancients, comes from. Our protagonists, our heroes in the story, they must walk the Way of Ancients to complete their quest. Prosthetic Records has been absolutely wonderful to work with. When we released our first full-length record, Into the Azure, back in 2020, Steve Joe, the label rep from Prosthetic, contacted us and basically said, hey guys, love the music. Next time you want to release something, hit us up. We would like to work with you. So the pandemic happened, and we took some time to write our EP, Border World. So when the Border World EP was finished, we came back to Prosthetic with a press kit and the finished EP and all of the credentials that you would need to submit to a label. And Steve, funnily enough, basically said, I was ready to hand you guys a contract back when you released your first record. And it's been smooth sailing ever since. Steve Joe is fantastic. Will Collins, Becky, everybody at the label has been wonderful and has gotten us in contact with so many great people. They've done a wonderful job at promoting the record and working with us with the production of the vinyl and the CD and everything. But yes, they've gotten us in contact with a lot of great people, and more people now have heard our music than ever. So, I have nothing but great things to say about Prosthetic. So shout out to them, and thank you for everything you've done. So as far as what we do in our lives to sustain ourselves outside of music, we have a multitude of things. Some of us are service industry guys. I myself actually manage a restaurant for the company Against the Grain Brewery. I've been with that company for over 6 years now at this point. Our drummer, Mike Hargrave, He is a dealer at a local casino. So if you ever want to get your gambling on anywhere in the Louisville, Kentucky area, go see our boy Mike. River Jordan, our guitar player, he is a contract worker. He does all sorts of odd jobs, fixing up homes and houses and interiors and exteriors. But yeah, we're all hardworking fellas, working class dudes. But we love to play music, so that's where our passion truly lies. I would trace my love for heavy metal music back to the very first time I ever heard Hell's Bells by AC/DC. And now I know that AC/DC is not necessarily considered a metal band, they're a hard rock band, but the feeling I got the first time I ever heard Hell's Bells and you know the opening track to Back in Black, and when the bells first start ringing and the opening riff comes in, I will never forget hearing that song for the first time. But onward from that, my trajectory into discovering heavy music was fairly standard. I started with classic rock bands like AC/DC or Led Zeppelin or what have you, Deep Purple, and from there on got into bands like Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, and then on to thrash metal bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Creator, Testament, Exodus, so on and so forth. And then from there, I got into death metal and black metal. So it's kind of been like a full circle as far as like where my love for the music has come from. But we have never forgotten to keep a bit of a rock and roll mentality within Volcandra, because we do love some good old rock and roll. There definitely are a lot of obstacles when it comes to being a musician, especially in this genre of music. You really have to work at it for a very long time. I've been playing in bands and touring in bands for about 10 years at this point now, and Volcandra is the first band where I have gotten a record deal. And I think now that we are where we're at now, being a touring live act that is signed to a record label, there are still plenty more of obstacles, and I think that comes in the form of there being so many bands, so many very, very good bands that are releasing records and going on tour. So I mean, there is a bit of a saturation issue, I guess, in the sense that there are so many. So what you have to do is try to write the best music possible and present it in the best way possible, whether that be the level of production for your record, or having music videos, having a good stage setup, having good looking merchandise to sell at your shows. You really have to check off all the boxes and cover all the bases to really impress people. And I think on top of that, you have to be a band that puts out quality music consistently over a long period of time. It seems that longevity for metal bands is kind of what garners the most respect at the end of the day. Like a band that has been through it, they've been around for a very long time, and they've overcome all of these obstacles. I think that's the key in this industry. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from Pat O'Brien one time. Me and my bandmates at the time, we were fairly young, and we asked Pat, like what is like the best piece of advice you could give to a young metal musician, and literally all he said was, you just got to keep doing it. And I think slowly over time that is proving to be true, because I mean, the more you do this, the more people you meet, the more connections you make, and if you're playing your cards right, hopefully your music improves over time as well. So, but yeah, there are a lot of obstacles, and I don't think they will ever stop coming at you. Your obstacles are only going to change based on what level your music career is at. But if you love playing this music and you love doing it, it's all worth it at the end of the day. As far as like a non-metal genre that I think would be really interesting to collaborate with, it would be orchestral music. I'm a huge fan of orchestral music, namely from soundtracks from films or video games. Some of my favorite composers off the top of my head would be Ko Otani. He's done soundtracks for some of the Gamera films from the 90s, or a Godzilla film from the early 2000s. As you can see, I'm a huge fan. I also love Akira Ifukube, another great Japanese composer who is no longer with us. But I love a lot of composers from other film series, like Howard Shore, who's done The Lord of the Rings. I like Hans Zimmer. I like John Williams. But yeah, I think any sort of like epic orchestral score, I mean, that's right up my alley. And I think Volcandra's music could potentially work with something like that. Maybe one day, maybe we'll get to do something like Metallica's S&M if we ever get big enough. As far as like other artists, I'm a huge fan of the Swedish rock band Hellas. They just have this wonderful sense of escapism, and their music is so whimsical and so well written. And although their genre of music is vastly different from what Volcandra does, I think our band and their band share that sense of wonder with their music. You know, we share the idea that the music can take you somewhere else, and you can break away from everyday life. So that's more or less like a dream tour for me if we ever got to tour with a band like Hellas. I'm a huge fan of them. I think the evolution of heavy music, especially in modern times today, is very interesting, because when the genre first started out, you had bands like Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, and then you had thrash metal bands, and then you had death metal bands and black metal bands, and so on and so forth. And now today there are so many different subgenres kind of intermingling with one another. You know, you have a lot of bands that are combining different subgenres together in their music to make kind of a more unique sound. And then you have other bands that combined those elements, and while they are not necessarily reinventing the wheel, they are presenting, you know, this certain style of music in a way that still feels refreshing, that still feels refined. So I think it's interesting. I think heavy music has been around for a long enough time that people who have like discerning tastes can find just about anything that they like, because there's so much to choose from, and because there is like this melting pot of genres. I do feel like the evolution of metal in general is in a really good place. I think that there's a healthy appreciation for everything from traditional heavy metal to, you know, progressive technical death metal on the heavier side of things. I mean, there's a lot of bands that are doing some really cool experimental stuff out there, but you can also come out with a record that might sound like it came out of like 1975 and it still sound really cool. So I don't think we don't need to do anything super new, you know, like I don't think bands need to bend over backwards to be super different or anything. I think at the end of the day, all that really matters is just writing a good song. And the beauty of where heavy music is today is that it has existed so long that there are so many different genres that you can draw from to create something, you know, kind of your own. So it's interesting, and it's kind of exciting to see where heavy music will be in, you know, 5-10 years from now. So if I had to choose between guitar shredding or drum blast beats, I don't know, man. I honestly can't choose, because that's all contingent on what genre of music you're playing. If you play in like an old school heavy metal band, you don't need blast beats, but you do need guitar shredding. And then if you play in like a death metal band or a black metal band, you don't necessarily need shredding guitar, but you need blast beats. So both are equally important in my book. I've been to a lot of memorable concerts in my life, but there are a few that I think are the most noteworthy. One of which was Iron Maiden. Fantastic show all around. I'll never forget it. Another one was Rush. I saw Rush back in like 2012, and that was like really spontaneous. A friend of mine had extra tickets, and I got to go kind of on a whim, and it was amazing. Another one was I saw Megadeth when they did an anniversary tour for Rust in Peace, where they played the record from start to finish, and that was incredible. Testament and Exodus opened up that show, and it was just a glorious night of thrash metal. And I think another one would be Metallica. I saw Metallica, I think, back in 2010 when Death Magnetic came out, and The Sword and Down opened that show. And, you know, Metallica played a lot of stuff off of Death Magnetic, which is a fine record, but they played a lot of old songs, and some that I wasn't expecting. One of which being "Fight Fire with Fire," which is one of my favorite Metallica tracks. But yeah, I mean, all those big giant bands that kind of wrote the book on how to rock. Those are the most memorable shows I've been to, I think. Okay, so a 12 a.m. studio session or a 6 a.m. rehearsal, I definitely gotta go with the 12 a.m. studio session, because I can't remember the last time I was awake at 6 a.m. But yeah, 12 a.m. studio session sounds really good, because I'm usually up around that time, and sometimes when you're burning the midnight oil, that's when a lot of cool creative ideas come out. So as far as a guilty pleasure song goes, I don't really have any guilty pleasures, but I do love music from all sorts of genres, and I do think as a musician, it's important to explore other genres of music that aren't in your particular genre that you play. I think it's good to do that to find inspiration that you might not find otherwise. And a genre of music that I really like is Japanese city pop, which is essentially pop music from Japan, usually from like the 80s, the 90s. And the cool thing about that genre is they would have all these like world-class like jazz musicians usually, you know, providing like the music for the songs. But one of my favorite artists from that genre is Chisato Moritaka, and I really love the song "Goodbye Season." It's a real bop. I think you should check it out. It's good stuff. As far as future plans for Volcandra are concerned, during the album cycle for The Way of Ancients, we plan to get out on the road as much as we possibly can. Coming up this spring, we're going to be out for about 11 days with death metal band Macabre from Wisconsin. We're going to do some northeastern dates in the USA and Canada. And from then on, we're going to try and get out as much as we can and promote this record the best that we can. And beyond that, it'll be rinse repeat. We're going to write more albums and go on more tours, and hopefully they'll be bigger and better with each one. But I think our main goal is to keep doing what we're doing bigger and better, and hopefully play with bigger bands and grow our audience over time. So thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure answering these questions. Please check out The Way of Ancients, and we'll see you next time.